Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, welcoming you to another exciting edition of Fighting Game Thursday. This week the information superhighway has been absolutely buzzing about the recent release of Final Fantasy VII, the so-called remake, a game many people have fantasised about for decades. As a result, every YouTuber under the sun is talking about the game at the moment, which has resulted in somewhat of an echo chamber. So today, rather than looking at the exact same game as all the other tubers, we are going to be going back and looking at a different game, starring Cloud, Sephiroth and co. Today we are going to be focusing in on a bizarre fighting game featuring the famous cast that was released way back in 1998, back when the original version of Final Fantasy VII was still fairly hot off of the press. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Ehrgeiz, if I'm pronouncing that right. God bless the ring, the Sony PlayStation's Final Fantasy VII fighting game. Yeah! To start today's story off, we need to go back to 1996, the year prior to the release of the original version of Final Fantasy VII. In August of this same year, Squaresoft would publish a fighting game known as Tobal No. 1. A game that is historically significant for many reasons. A few weeks ago on this channel we covered Power Stone, an early example of an arena fighter. Tobal No. 1 is a game that is significantly older than Power Stone, but would contain similar mechanics which would later be associated with this emerging genre. Basically, the controls in this fighting game allowed full freedom of movement in the ring, as long as the player remains facing their opponent. The game was also novel in that it contained a quest mode, an additional gameplay option that indulged players in a three-dimensional dungeon explorational quest, featuring fighting game controls. Apart from the game being novel in what it could offer gamers, the title also marked not only the first Squaresoft game to be released on the Sony PlayStation, but it also was a landmark in the fact it was the first Squaresoft game to be released on a CD-ROM period. The game was very popular in Japan, shifting over 650,000 units in just its first year. The game's success cannot simply be credited to the gameplay itself though, as the healthy sales the title received are also attributed to the coveted demo disc the game would include on release. The demo disc in question contained many gamers' first experience with Final Fantasy VII, the ambitious RPG that would change everything. So, keeping this in mind, many gamers would purchase Tobal No. 1 just to get a peek of a future masterpiece. So, as you can now see from this, Final Fantasy VII and fighting game history were intertwined before the famous game even existed. So it is not that surprising really that a Final Fantasy VII fighting game would later come into existence too. In regards to Tobal No. 1 though, which we just looked at, the characters in the game were designed by Toriyama, the same man who designed the characters in both Dragon Ball Z and Chrono Trigger, and the game's interesting playstyle though was the brainchild of the game's director, Seiichi Ishii, a gentleman who by this point in his career could also brag of being one of the co-creators of both Virtua Fighter and Tekken, making him one of the most important men in all of fighting game history. So with Virtua Fighter, Tekken and Tobal No. 1 amongst his accolades, the next big game he would direct would be Ehrgeiz, God Bless the Ring, another game developed by his company Dream Factory. In terms of the game's development, Seiichi Ishii wanted to create a game that drew influence from all of his previous work, but would continue to build on the formula, offering gamers something new and interesting once again. As mentioned earlier, Tobal had been quite novel previously due to the game offering 360 degree movement, which was a feature he was keen to include in Ehrgeiz. In this game though, Ishii wanted to offer the player even further freedom of movement, taking inspiration from the wrestling game genre, resulting in the creation of a game full of fast-paced fighting involving characters who can move freely in three-dimensional stages which are filled with many interactive objects. The arenas also contained various elevations to fight from. The camera work that tracked the action was also new for a fighting game at the time, and featured a camera that was more or less in a fixed position, zooming in and out with the action, but not tracking around the arena, as would be common in most other 2D and 3D fighting games. Differing from Tobal No. 1 previously, a game that was a Sony PlayStation exclusive, Ehrgeiz would be a game published by Squaresoft, but this time a game that would also see release in the arcade. The game marked a joint venture between Square and Namco, which would result in the game being developed to run on a Namco System 12 arcade board. The original arcade version of the game and the PlayStation port that would arrive later would end up being quite different games. So, in order to understand this story fully, we need to look at both releases of this title. When I was a youngster, I always assumed that Ehrgeiz was a crossover fighting game, just like Super Smash Bros. And the Marvel vs. Capcom series, due to the inclusion of Final Fantasy characters paired with many I was not familiar with. It turns out I was wrong though, as away from the Final Fantasy characters, all of the other fighters who appear in this game were created exclusively for Ehrgeiz, and in fact when it comes to the original arcade version of the game, all of the other Final Fantasy characters included were no more than hidden unlockables. Thus meaning, character-wise at least, Ehrgeiz was initially trying to lean on its own roster of fighters. In fact, let's talk about these overshadowed characters and their reasoning for fighting. The game's manual features a prologue relating to the game's plot. It states that 50 years ago a mysterious weapon was discovered in the ruins of a German castle. This weapon came to be known as the Ehrgeiz and would go on to feature as a prize in a fighting tournament to determine the world's greatest fighter. Elsewhere in the world, a sinister organisation in the Middle East excavate an ancient ruin that is believed to hold the key to immortality. The key to the door though is missing. A legend has surfaced that a stone embedded in the Ehrgeiz is the missing key to the door. So ambitious hopefuls enter the tournament in a hope to win the coveted Ehrgeiz. So, who are the fighters who enter this tournament? Let's find out. The character who was initially positioned as the face of this title is a fighter known as Ken Godhand Mishima. He bears a strong resemblance to Namco's Tekken character Kazuya Mishima, and one would gather their matching surnames is there to imply that they are somehow related. Story-wise, he is a mercenary and former member of the sinister organisation mentioned earlier. He stumbles upon the ancient ruins immortality story himself, so leaves the organisation, severing his own right arm in the hope that the organisation won't pursue him and instead see that as a worthy sacrifice. He shares what he knows with another powerful organisation in exchange for a prosthetic right arm, which he wields as a weapon like Barret from Final Fantasy VII. Establishing his own company, their research leads to the Ehrgeiz tournament, which leads to a Godhand entering to obtain the legendary sword. Moving through playable characters, a little quicker we have Han, a young action movie star and master of Taekwondo. Interestingly, he has a prosthetic right leg, due to it disappearing in a mysterious cloud of black smoke. During his search for an explanation, he stumbles upon information linking this incident to the ancient ruins, which is why he enters the tournament. Next up we have Prince Doza, the world's greatest kickboxer, who has no equal in his field. After becoming bored and challengerless, he enters the Ehrgeiz tournament. He has no interest in the Ehrgeiz and is just there in the spirit of good competition. Another fighter in the game is Yoko, a young lady studying archaeology who is also an expert in jiu-jitsu. Due to her mixed bag of skills, she has been acknowledged by Interpol, who as a result includes her in their hand-to-hand combat research team. Interpol order her to enter the tournament to investigate the suspicious activity. Sasuke, as demonstrated by his appearance, is a ninja and a member of the sinister organisation known as Red Scorpion, the group Godhand left. In the game he has amnesia, so does not know his own true identity. His goal is to gain the Ehrgeiz in the hope that he can regain his memories. Next we have Li Xuan, a master of lethal Kempo, who can apparently kill a man with one strike. Allegedly he was killed with a lethal poison years ago, but was brought back to life with a legendary elixir, which also makes him younger as time proceeds. Due to suffering from Benjamin Button syndrome, he seeks immortality so that he ultimately does not become so young that he returns to the void. Wolf Girl Jo survived a plane crash as an infant, landing in the Amazon rainforest. With her parents dead, she was raised by wolves. This alternative upbringing allegedly has led her to have physical strength surpassing that of 3 regular humans. Following the death of her wolf parents at the hands of humans, she becomes a vicious killer and is imprisoned. Red Scorpion scouts her though to seek the Ehrgeiz without her understanding. Lastly, from the selectable lineup from the arcade game, we have Dasha Inoba, a pro wrestler who is a disciple of the founder of the tournament. Tournament founder, Carl Schneider, has recently been found mysteriously dead. To gain the stone and uncover the mystery of his master's death, Dasha sets out to win the tournament. With this story in place, as you can see, the cast of the original characters who feature in the arcade game all have strong reasons for fighting, although there are 3 further characters in the original game we have not mentioned yet. After an arcade unit has been powered on for 30 days, Cloud from Final Fantasy VII gets added to the player select screen as a playable character. Unlike the rest of the cast, Cloud has no Ehrgeiz arc of his own, and is simply just considered a guest character. After a unit has been on for 60 days, Tifa also gets added to the game's roster as the second unlockable guest character. The only fighter from the arcade version we are yet to touch on in the game is the final boss Django, a mythical creature awaiting visitors within the ancient ruins. This mysterious force wields 2 different forms. In his first form he resembles Red 13 from the plot of Final Fantasy VII, only instead having a grey coat of fur as opposed to a red one. In his second form he takes the form of a Red Scorpion in the game's final encounter. Speaking of Django, he becomes unlockable in the arcade game after 90 days, which includes a red furred alternative costume, making him further resemble Red 13. Whilst in the arcade, Ehrgeiz was promoted as a fighting game that featured a few Final Fantasy VII guest characters, everything would change when it came to the release of Ehrgeiz on the Sony PlayStation. In fact, Cloud would feature on the game's box art, and much of the game's marketing material would focus on Cloud over anything else. The title was promoted as a 3D fighting action game with favourite characters from Final Fantasy VII. The Final Fantasy VII overhaul of the title would go further than just simply promotion though. In the home version of the game, Cloud and Tifa would no longer be unlockable fighters, and instead Ehrgeiz owners could play as either of the fighters from the get-go. In fact, when it comes to the home port, Ehrgeiz would expand its roster further, including adding more Final Fantasy VII characters. This would include the main antagonist, Sephiroth, to the lineup. New unlockable characters would be added too, such as Yuffie and Vincent Valentine, 2 fighters who were also unlockable in Final Fantasy VII, which I thought was a cool little touch. Another addition to the roster was Zack Fair, a non-playable character from Final Fantasy VII who was placed in the game to help complicate Cloud's backstory. As we know, Zack's popularity would lead him to star in Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core for the PlayStation Portable, but Ehrgeiz marks the first ever occasion in which he was available as a playable character. Interesting stuff, eh? The Final Fantasy VII-fication of the game was not the only big change to the home version, as a whole new play mode was added, harkening back once again to Shishiichi's work on Tobal No. 1. Basically, when he created Tobal No. 1, he decided to include the game's quest mode, due to the game being a home console exclusive with no arcade counterpart. This was basically down to the fact that he felt a console fighting game needed greater depth in the gameplay design. This led to him designing the game's quest mode, a feature he decided to re-implement into Ehrgeiz. In Ehrgeiz quest mode, players can fight through extensive dungeon crawls and can equip different weapons and items like in an RPG, further linking the game to a Final Fantasy-like experience. This play mode presents the player with a basic hack-and-slash style RPG experience, which presents options to explore towns and enter randomly generated dungeons. Players take the role of archaeologists and head downwards in the hope of finding artifacts. In fact, this play mode introduces another further 2 characters to the lineup, archaeologists Claire Andrews and Koji Masuda. Players can level up and improve their stats as they progress, and use items to replenish health dropped by monsters. There are a number of RPG tropes amongst this basic play mode. On top of all of this, the game has its share of minigames too, such as a race mode and a ball game mode. This mixes the gameplay up somewhat. All in all though, the main draw of Ehrgeiz is the arcade 3D arena combat. In terms of the game's combat mechanics, there is quite a lot going on in Ehrgeiz. Characters can perform what are known as high, mid and low attacks, basically moves that target different sections of their opponent's bodies. Guards can be performed against all of these moves via either standing up and blocking or crouching and blocking, depending on what they are trying to guard against. Special attacks are also executable moves that cannot be blocked. Special attacks can either be dodged or interrupted by performing a special attack at the same time as an opponent. The game also has what is known as a frame technique, which can be executed when the right buttons are pressed at a specific time during an attack. The game also have strong upper attacks, lower attacks, running attacks, walking attacks, jump attacks, body presses, blade catches for countering weapons, triangle jumps, and powered up ultimate special attacks. As I said, there is a lot going on here. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, inspiration was also drawn from wrestling games with regard to this title's combat, meaning that grappling in the game is also possible, as well as reversing grapples. Relating to the grappling, hold breaks, special throws and tackling opponents is all also possible. Like Power Stone after it, picking up objects such as crates and throwing them at opponents can also be used to strategically win matches, and additional weapons can also be found within the crates. Despite the game having a lot of different techniques available for players to take advantage of, the game is often criticised today for being a game that is unbalanced, where victory can be achievable simply by mashing buttons, even if players do not know what they are doing. This includes in competitive play amongst friends. The big publications and video game review sources at the time would cover Ehrgeiz, so let's take a look at what some journalists had to say about the game. IGN would deliver mixed feelings about the title, stating, "What's cool about Ehrgeiz is its free-roaming 3D engine, which developer Dream Factory worked especially well on. Characters move quickly around the ringer environments with grace and ease, and are motion captured better than the average fighter. The arenas were constructed in rather small spaces, which counters the free-roaming sensibility. This at first seems kind of lame, but it's clear the developers wanted the fighters in range of one another, and it provides for a more tightly fought match. Ehrgeiz is remarkably easy to pick up and play. That's its biggest strength and ironically its biggest weakness. The big problem with Ehrgeiz as a fighter is its simplicity. It's shallow and not terribly well balanced. For example, by picking Cloud Strife, players can kick the crap out of just about anyone by carefully managing his special attacks, which is his sword attack. But by picking another character, say even God's Hand, you'll have a much more difficult time getting through the game. The quest mode is quite unique. It takes a good 8 hours to play all the way through it, and it's especially cool to see it in a fighting game. While not the best fighter on the block, Ehrgeiz has a number of good things going for it. After players zip through the piece of cake single player fighting mode, the game has what it takes to contend in the overall entertainment category. All in all, Ehrgeiz is not for the hardcore gamer, it's for the more casual player who wants a little for everything and who may be intimidated by hardcore fighting games. Whilst IGN presented mixed thoughts on the game, GameSpot on the other hand appeared to review the game a lot harsher, summarising, "There's just not much of a game here. Bouts usually end in a flurry of button mashing, and the awkward guarding scheme will drive most hardcore fighting fans away screaming with frustration and heartbreak. If you're looking for eye candy, Ehrgeiz will give you plenty of cavities. However, if it's a deep and engaging fighting game you want to delve into, do look elsewhere." Next Generation would take a slightly more positive approach, summarising the game stating, "Technologically speaking, Ehrgeiz is an impressive fighter, but it does have balance problems, especially the one-button gameplay of the one-player game. Still, it's good to see developers straying from the accepted formula with new fighting designs that truly work." Reflecting back on Ehrgeiz today, the game was clearly very ambitious on what it was looking to achieve. Seiichi Ishii could have taken the easy approach here by developing a title like Tekken or Virtua Fighter again, but instead he decided to try and create something a little more original, and would attempt to innovate the fighting game genre by going where no designer had gone before. This would result in a fun little game with a chaotic nature, but one which certainly has a lot of holes in its armour when it comes to actual fighting game mechanics and good game balance. If the game is remembered by anyone today, it is often mostly for the fact that the game included so many Final Fantasy VII characters amongst its selectable lineup of fighters. However, to be fair to Ehrgeiz, it perhaps deserves a little more credit than simply being a Final Fantasy VII cash grab, even if it didn't feature the best graphics in the world. The game was probably the most fleshed out 3D arena fighting game thus far, which was a result of Seiichi Ishii taking inspiration from his previous titles and his love for wrestling games, which would lead to a rather unique experience for the time. A few years later, the world would get Capcom's Power Stone, the first truly brilliant 3D arena fighting game. But the question is, would it have existed if it were not for the missteps of Ehrgeiz first? Who knows really? There are certainly a lot of mechanical similarities between the two, and no matter how many times Power Stone creator Itsuno states that the story of his game was simply inspired by Indiana Jones, a 3D arena fighting game involving a quest for the Ehrgeiz Stone looks a lot more similar to Itsuno's quest for the Power Stone than, say, the works of Spielberg. All of this could simply be one huge coincidence, but I am doubtful to say the very least. Power Stone is an awesome 3D arena fighting game, and it appears that Ehrgeiz was an important development stepping stone in how the game came to be. To summarise, Ehrgeiz was an important game in helping to navigate the 3D arena fighting genre forward, which is rarely touched upon today, which I would gather is largely down to the distraction of the game being chock full of Final Fantasy VII characters, which to be fair, no one can deny was bloody cool. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Ehrgeiz, the Final Fantasy VII fighting game. Let me know down in the comment section below what you thought of today's video and which fighting game you would like me to cover next. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like, hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss a video. I also have a huge backlog of content for you to go back and enjoy. Finally, a huge shout out to the Patreon following who are keeping this channel alive and kicking through these very strange times. So as a result of this channel being mostly Patreon funded, it's time for me to read out and shout out a hell of a lot of names. So bear with me because it's the first time I've tried to pronounce many of these, and you know how bad I am when it comes to butchering names, so I'm going to give it my best. Huge shout-outs go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, Joseph Razmek, Alethea Swanson, Angel Light 85, Asobi Kwang DX, Carlos Domingos, Computer Man, Daniel Daly, Esteban Gallardo Garcia, Gary Pinkett, Gianni V. Santisi, Glenny Glenn, House of the Ted, J.O. Paulo Lopez, Jordan Durant, J.O. Paulo de Carvalho Piera Vinagre, Lars Zondervan, Michael Baker, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, SpongeMat BYT, Timothy W. Haskins II, TOG Driver, St. Spacies, Adam Castin, Andis Rainsbergs, Andrew Bazansky, Andrew Pearson, Antonio Rodriguez, Bernard NG, Chris Fisk, Chris Cool, Craig Jenkins, Dan Barlow Jr., David Bell, Doug Perkins, Francesco La Criolla, Gregory Smoragi Wicks, Hans Christian, Ivan M, Jake Whiteford, James McDonald, Jazzy Tay, Joel, John Bates, King's Knight, Lobster Puncher, Lewis Viant, Marvin Aroliga, Master Jinx, Matthew Rindle, Mean Machine Dean, Paul Elliott, RetroReversing.com, Richard Stewart, Rick67, Sarah Powell, Sierra H, Ulceraya. That was quite a hard one, I hope I did a good job. Stephen Lewis, Time Lord Soundwave, Tom Elliott, Vlay Mink Renee. So yes, I would like to thank all of you very much for supporting me on Patreon, as well as all of the $10 and below patrons too. The $5, the $2, the $1, every single donation counts. Thank you so much for literally changing my life. I'll be posting a more in-depth thank you video over the course of the next week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We did it, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Also, just want to try and pronounce the name again. Soraya H. Al Soraya. Was that a little bit better? See you soon.